So it's my great pleasure to bring Fredrik up, and he's going to talk about how they have done DDMRP at ASSA ABLOY. Fredrik.
All right. You hear me okay? Okay, very good. So yeah, let's get started. First of all, I wanted to sort of give you a bit of a, let's see if this thing works, yeah. Not everyone would necessarily know what ASSA ABLOY is. I thought you need to, at least a basic background of what ASSA ABLOY is as a company. So ASSA ABLOY is a big Swedish multinational. It's been around for 30 years. It's actually our 30th anniversary. This is basically the head office back in Stockholm. So we have 61,000 employees and a turnover of 12.3 billion. So big company existing all over the world, active in different type of, let's say, opening solutions or locks, if you will, and also entrance system solutions, which you could translate to doors. I will come back to that. So if we look a little bit at the structure of ASSA ABLOY, just to get the sense of what it's made up of, we have, let's say, three types of offerings. We have the door openings and access control solutions, we have the identification access management solutions, and we have the entrance automation solutions. That's my home, but that's where I'm located. And then you'd see that the door openings is like a half of the business. So we have divided that up into different parts. So there is a sort of Americas part, there is a European part, and there is an Asian part. Then we have global technologies, which is more into the identification and access management. And then we have the entrance systems, which is, let's say, the piece where I'm located. And that's a third of the business. We are global, so we are existing across all the different geographies. If we look at the entrance systems division and sort of dive in a little bit further into that, we are made up of 4 different segments. So we have a pedestrian segment. These are, you could say, entrance solutions for pedestrians. So when we walk into a shop, we might walk across, a revolving door or a swinging door or a sliding door or something like that. Then we have the industrial segment. That's really where I'm sort of heading up logistics and planning right now. So this is where you find industrial doors like, an overhead sectional door or let's say one of those high-speed doors you might have seen, or dock levelers or things like that. So anything that typically you will find in a big distribution center, you will find much of our products there. Then we have the residential segment. So this is another way of saying garage doors for home use. So we are a big producer of that. And then finally, we also do perimeter security solutions. So bollards like that, but might you see come out of the street to sort of hinder people to get in there with the car, things like that. So those are the basic product offerings and also the segments which we try to serve. So if we look at entrance systems and get some basic key figures about that, we are a company that are head office in Switzerland since a couple of years. We have 16,000 employees. So fairly sizable company in its own right. We have sales companies in 37 countries. We have distribution in 130. Last year we had a sales of 4.1 billion, and we have 3,300 service technicians. So we are quite heavy on that. We not only sell products, we also service products. That's a big part of our business as well. So that's a little bit about entrance systems. If we look a little bit at our history, this company, which we could call Entrance Systems, really started back in 2002, whereas ABLOY bought a small company called Bisam on the southwest part of Sweden in Landskrona. And that company had a turnover of 0.2 billion euro. Then it started a sort of journey of acquisition, as you can see, in 2011, and then things started to change. We had a very dynamic president that was good at M&A, and he had a vision of creating a company that was selling entrance systems as opposed to just individual doors, or particular products. And when I came into the company 2018, you could see already at that time they could say, 10 years ago we were a tenth of the size that we are now. Since then, it's doubled, and we kind of keep on going like that. So as you can imagine, that puts certain sort of challenges to the supply chain. I mean, things like having a completely homogeneous ERP landscape, that's a dream. It's a nice dream, not realizable necessarily for us, because, we add new products, new, let's say, companies into this structure more or less every year. So it's typically like this, that when we talk to the financial market, we say we will grow 10% year on year. 5% of that is organic, 5% of that is acquisition. So there is always a pipeline of new companies coming in. Just that you're aware of kind of the context a little bit. So if we start talking about the supply chain of ASSA ABLOY Entrance Systems and sort of try to imagine a little bit what does that look like, we have roughly 50 factories across the globe. Those are found in Europe, Asia, and North America. And for the most part, it's sort of assembly or configuration to order of the final product. So let's say we might agree with Amazon, you need this number of industrial doors. Well, those doors are made to that particular building with that particular set of dimensions and so forth. So we have to configure that. Then, let's say, those factories that produce these products, they have to hold raw materials, components, and so forth to be able to assemble those products and sort of send them out to the installation site. So there is a bit of a planning problem in that regard of making sure that you have the right raw materials, you have the right components in those factories. So that's where we have been focusing a lot. Then, due to our structure, sort of this journey of acquisition, we have 20 plus ERPs to work with. We have roughly between 1,000 and 6,000 SKUs per factory, and around 100 to 300 suppliers per factory. So that's the sort of typical situation that we have to manage when we go into one of the factories and work with them. So that's a little bit of a context, just so that you were aware of a bit, what is ASSA ABLOY, the entrance systems, and the supply chain. So who is Fredrik Helgesson? That might also be a question worth asking. I don't know. But just so that you know, I'm a Swedish guy. I'm married. I have 2 daughters. This is when life's really good. That's in the summer, and I'm out in the archipelago together with the family. Happens not as often as I would like to, but when it's there, it's nice. I live in Gothenburg, so I have access to the archipelago. I've been 6 years now with ASSA ABLOY Entrance Systems. I started off as Material Management Director for the division, and since a year back, I'm the Logistics Director of the industrial segment. So some prior experience, I've been working in a number of industries prior to coming to ASSA. So I started off at a sort of consumer goods / pulp and paper company called SCA. Nowadays they're called Essity. Then I went into consulting for a while. I've been with a couple of other kind of consumer goods companies, so Duni and then Electrolux. Sort of I've moved into that space, coming out of more, let's say, maybe it is consumer goods, you could argue. Then I spent 13 years in medical devices, so with a company called Nobel Biocare and another one called Dentsply Sirona. So there I also had quite a long stint, I would say. And since 6 years back, I'm at ASSA ABLOY. And way back then, I did a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering in Linköping University. So that's kind of where I was formed, maybe a little bit intellectually. What do I know? So that's me. But getting into the case, let's say, why did we sort of want to improve the material? What was important to us when we did that? So, starting off, we had a situation of, when you started to look into one of the factories, we had typically a high percentage of let's say, slow movers. You could see that to the right on one of the factories as an example. We had long lead times, we had high MOQs, and we had this fairly decentralized organization. So what we wanted to do and why I came in was to sort of, do something about this, So as you can imagine, I mean, the game is you want to make sure that you, let's say, keep or improve the delivery precision, whilst you sort of improve what we call the material throughput time. That's one of the things that we measure across the different sites in Assa Abloy. And I needed to sort of generate, I thought, quick results to, create some momentum. They had decided they needed to have this role. I wanted to show that, okay, yeah, that was a good idea. So I tried to sort of make sure that they still liked that idea after a year or so. So that was a little bit the background to why we started off. Then it's a question, why did we start off with the DMRP? So I thought I wanted to give you a little bit of a story of that. Why did I start with the DMRP? So if I give a little bit of a sort of description of my history in terms of supply chain and thinking about supply chain, fairly early on, I got quite some exposure to what you could call replenishment as a principle. My boss, he had been working with, Walmart over the US. We talked about quick response partnerships and stuff like that, which was, actually used quite a lot at SCA and Electrolux. So I had that thinking a little bit. Then I went to Dune. I did a big supply chain transformation project. At that time, the technology that sort of had grown and become available was, advanced planning systems. So I implemented that at Dune, and we did gain good results of that. It took us 3 years. It took us a lot of work and a lot of data cleaning. And you had not to be risk averse when you were in the sort of driver's seat of those projects, I can tell you. But we learned a lot from doing that. Then I started to get some experience of what we could call a demand-driven approach. So we ran a pull-based supply chain program at this company called Noble Biocare. We had a guy in the US working for me who designed a sort of demand-driven planning solution. He had been at Michigan State, sort of studying for Stephen Melnick. And I'll tell you why that is kind of interesting a little bit later in a few seconds. But we achieved a really nice inventory reduction. We took out half of the capital in 12 months, and we were awarded this Swedish Post Logistics Award, which, well, it's kind of a big thing in Sweden. so we were happy to receive that. Then 2016, I went to the ASM conference in Washington, D.C., because we wanted to find out. I was sitting on the board of the sister organization of ASM in Sweden, and we needed to sort of see, should we have some kind of keynote speaker coming in? So I listened then to Carol and Dick talking about demand-driven sales and operations planning. I bought the book. So I recognize this. This looks really a lot like what we were doing at Noble Biocare. So then I started to sort of go back and say, who is this Stephen Melnick guy? And then I thought, yeah, he might have influenced this guy that designed the solution. Well, you can see he wrote a paper about the DMRP, as you probably know. So there was an influence there, which I only found out afterwards. I saw the house, and then afterwards I got to see the drawing, if you will. So I did that. I did the DDP course, the DDL course, and the DDS and OP course I did actually last time we had the conference. So that's kind of my background. So why did we decide to do DDMRP at Assa Abloy? Well, one story I think attached to that is that we had something called the Assa Abloy replenishment tool available. So prior to that I came in, people had developed a tool that had been used quite broadly in opening solutions to analyze inventory. You also had some planning functionality. And when I looked at that with my sort of DDMRP glasses on, I saw this is really close to DDMRP. You could tweak this a bit, and then you could use it for DDMRP. And it was possible to integrate to the different ERPs, which is also good because in our landscape you have to do something like that. And it also enabled us to sort of have a standard project approach. I talked to the guy that had developed this and said, how did you run the projects? So we sort of came up with a particular project approach, and then we did the pilot. So in the first factory, where you saw the sort of as-is analysis before, we started to do this for the swinger operators. And to cut it short, in 6 months, we took out 50% of inventory, or sort of double the turns. So we saw this thing works. This is something worth doing on a broader scale. So then we kind of try to lay out more of a formal project methodology in terms of how to do this. So what you see on the screen here is basically the way that we run our projects. So we start off, to prepare people. So we want to train them to make sure that they understand how to do this, why they should do this. We also try to prepare the data integration. That's something that you can do before you start mobilizing people locally. If you need to sit down with IT and say, this is what you need to do to integrate to this particular ERP. Then you do the assist analysis. By doing this assist analysis, the nice thing what you can do with that is that you can let money talk. You can actually show, the money on the table and sort of explain why should I do this. Once you've sort of passed that milestone, then you can start doing, the mapping and the definition of the parameters and the process. You can understand the current state and the sort of future state, and then start rolling out the process, which you typically do supplier by supplier. In the beginning, you start small and then you expand. And then at some stage, you hand over to the line organization and say, now we're done with the project. This is hopefully daily business by now. So, you need to sort of write up the standard operating procedures and clarify the roles and responsibilities and things like that. So when we start off with the training, we try to make use of some of these approaches that have been developed by different companies in the room here. So we've been working with this DD Bricks workshop to sort of let the factory management teams experience what's really the difference between the existing way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And I think that's really important. Then you kind of get the gut feel, what is this really about? And I think that's important, if you don't want to sort of just fight with people and you want to take them through something that's a bit of fun, and after a while they sort of say, yeah, I kind of got it, I see a little bit of the light, and that's important. Then we also do more, into the depth kind of training. We do the DDP courses, so either face-to-face or online. So typically every 6 months or so, we have had enough volume from a number of factories to do another DDP course, and then, we typically make use of an external trainer to do that, so that people have the chance to hear it from people who really know what they are talking about. So also looking a little bit at the data integration, the tool is not that complicated. It's not that many data fields. It's only like 25 of them that we have to import. So it's fairly minimalistic, I would argue, if you compare to what you can do. But it's really just 2 files that you have to create. You have to be able to sort of run one of them on a daily basis and suck it into the tool, and then you have another one for analysis purposes. But it's also allowing us to sort of do it in this landscape where, some of them might have a fairly mature ERP landscape. Others, they have, you don't really want to know. But, it's 30-year-old, it's not current state by any means. But it can be, integrated to this type of solution. So there are some advantages of keeping it simple as well, if you are in that kind of environment. But anyhow, talking a little bit about the tool then and so forth, what that allows us to do is to do this assist analysis. So there are a number of reports sort of showing basic things that you want to do, like what's the inventory mix looking like, what's an ABC analysis looking like, what are the lead times like, what are the MOQs like, things like that. You just, get the sense of what is the situation now. Is it sort of Houston, we have a problem, or is it, no, it's quite nice, Most of the time it's more the Houston thing, but it's better for them to see that it is like that, in the particular factories. Then it also allows us to do both the planning piece and the execution piece that we are, I think those of us that have been through the DDP courses know what we talk about. So, you generate the purchase orders in our case, and then you have the alerts to sort of see where do you need to work on the execution side of things, So that's something that we can do here. It's based upon the DDMRP compliance criteria. We haven't actually asked for the whether we are compliant or not. So it's based upon, but it's since we're not selling this thing, we thought it might not be that important to us. And it's programmed now in a C#.NET environment. So it's after all fairly robust, fairly solid. It works for the purposes of what we are trying to achieve. But then people might ask, why do you use your own software? Well, first of all, it existed, It was there. And it was used for analysis and planning, and it was installed already in like 200 entities, maybe a little bit fewer than that when I started. And we have 500 users of that across the group. So it's a big thing, and it's supported by the finance community, and the finance community is quite strong in ASSA ABLOY. We are more bankers than industrialists if we are sort of buying all these companies. It's people dressed up like this that, run around just trying to buy companies. I'm not one of them. I just do it when I present. But nevertheless, you can imagine. And we had the resources, to continue to develop this. So we had some people who could work on it. So we could sort of develop the functionality as we sort of moved along, so we could add in, the integration, the alerts, the adjustment factors, and so forth. And we sort of use weekly sprints, and then we have fairly user-driven development, I would say. So ultimately, we, up till now, have the DDMRP functionality needed to achieve the results. But with that said, we'll see, as we grow and as we mature, we might get to a point where we say, now it may be the time to do something with an external piece of software. I just think that we are pushing it a bit further because it's not just an Excel sheet, so that might be the reason why we are where we are. But anyway, to give you a sense of what that can look like, this is what you see when you look at the improvement potential. So we basically can see what is the current state, what's inventory going to be like with DDMRP, what is it going to be like with lead time reduction, what is it going to be like if you sort of cut your MOQs down to a particular number of days, and what is it going to be like when you take out the no movers. That means that we know how much, gold there is in this heap, this heap, this heap, this heap. And then you kind of go do the sort of bang for the buck optimization, and you go where where there is the biggest bang for the buck. It's fairly simple, You don't have to argue with me. You look at where the bang is. So that helps us to decide, the priorities for each of the sites. And those are different, We have 15 sites implemented now. They are very different. Some of them are like fantastic MOQs. Well, that's not the problem. Work with DDMRP. Some of them have really crappy lead times and bad MOQs. We have to work with that to be able to generate value to sort of get DDMRP going. So it's good to know before you start, like that. Then in terms of the planning process, as we normally say when it comes to DDMRP, it's a simple process. It's fairly intuitive. It's quite visual. I think that's one of the upsides with DDMRP generally. I think that it's an understandable process. I would argue much more understandable than APS. I understand it because I've done 5 courses in operations research. The average planner normally does not have that background. So if we talk about real world, I think having planning philosophies or methodologies that actually fits to the real world and the real world situation is a good thing. So if you can achieve it with a simpler approach that people can understand, that's a good thing in my book. So this is just describing a little bit, kind of the daily workflow and the monthly workflow that you see here. So also, by having this type of software, it also allows us to look at things a little bit differently to compare to where we are, let's say, before we start. So these are a couple of examples of what we can see. So we can start maybe in the lower left corner there. So we have this overview of seeing, okay, how many items are in the different zones, what is the sort of alert situation. Then we can kind of see what is the target inventory, what is the actual inventory, and we can sort of track that month by month. So that's the high-level situation. How close am I to the target inventory of each of the sites? They can break it down per supplier and say, okay, how close are the different suppliers to the target inventory? What's the mix of that? What is the number of days of inventory and whatnot? Then I can break that down into what does it look per buffer and per supplier. and you know, how many items do I have in the various zones? What did it look like now? What did it look like a month ago? So I can kind of see how I progress over time. And then step by step, we can see that some of the factories have started to integrate this into their sort of report pack. So you have, you know, the number of items above green or in the red zone, or the percentage to the inventory target and so forth. And when I see that, I'm quite happy, because then it has become daily business, you know. That's the way it should be, that they have incorporated this into their own way of thinking. So what does this lead to? What has it led to? So I want to share a few examples. This is a garage door factory that we have in Czech Republic, where I worked with them during the years of COVID, actually. I never met with them before I kind of was done with the project face to face, so that had its set of challenges. I had met with them before, but you know, it was a bit of a challenge. So to kind of walk through a little bit what we did there, I mean, we implemented the MRP. We kind of did this business case thing in the beginning. We said, I think you can take out 35% of inventory and more than 40% of your MTPT. And then, like in February 2022, I thought, interesting, we are past that point. This has to be celebrated. So I kind of made the slide, went back to the steering committee and said, do you remember what we talked about back then when we made the business case? We've passed that point. So yeah, I wanted to show that. It's an example, I think, of a reasonably good factory, but not fantastic, implementing the MRP and the type of results that you can achieve as a result of that. So yeah, I think nice example of what can be achieved. Still, I think there is a lot to be done, but they have definitely kind of done the first steps. Second example, this is the first factory I showed you before. We did the MRP quite early on with them. They have a lot of their supply coming out of Asia. So the biggest supplier they have is another sister factory in Suzhou outside of Shanghai, or it's a big city in its own right. We were sort of struggling with the fact that, you know, we have really long lead times out of China. so I tried to sort of move them over to rail first. Then Ukraine war came and said, no, that's not going to happen. I need to do something else. So then I kind of went back to the school book and said, well, first part is, you know, positioning. Let's think about if we can put an inventory at the factory in China. So I combined the MRP with the decoupling point, you know, putting it one step further back. That turned out to be really strong. I wasn't aware of how powerful that is, but I learned. So what happened was that delivery precision out of the factory in Czech Republic increased 10%. So it went from 85 to 94. The other products also went up 3%, from 79 to 82. You know, kind of post-COVID type of improvement. The days of inventory went from 50 days to, let's say, well, in the first 6 months, like to 25, but then I added another year. 1 year later, we were at 15. That's, I think, rather astonishing what you can achieve having that type of challenge, after all, with the lead times that you do have, you know. So this is, I think, something that we really want to expand across all of the different, let's say, locations which has this, because this is not uncommon, that you have a number of big suppliers over in China or in Asia feeding into Europe, feeding into the US. So this can really be expanded, particularly across the pedestrian segments. And then finally, we have, let's say, one of the examples from the industrial side. So this is a dock leveler factory in Hunedoara in Romania. They also started off fairly early on. This is the number 2 factory in kind of what I did. And what happened there over the time period where we implemented was that we, first of all, stabilized delivery precision. So we got it up to the sort of 99% level, where it's been staying since. But we also, at the same time, then took the material throughput time down 33%. And what's interesting is that we have a sister factory in the US producing the same type of products, who have not implemented DDMRP. At the same time, their MTPT went up 25%, which I, of course, remind the VP of Ops of that segment every time I meet him. And I think it's starting to sink in now, but sometimes you have to work in mysterious ways to get people to understand and accept. So that's what we have achieved in a few, let's say, examples. This has raised some eyebrows within ASSA ABLOY, positively. So this is a picture from a kind of blog post of the CFO of the group. So to the there, that's Eric Peder, that's our CFO. To the right, you see Stefan Tissel, who is the father of this software, kind of in their own little way, try to promote it, a thumbs up. So yeah, we have that support. I think that's an important thing. It doesn't mean that you can walk in and just say, we're going to do DDMRP tomorrow, but it definitely does help to show that, it's endorsed. So what do we learn from this? So what have we learned from this? Well, there are maybe a couple of learnings that we have made. There are some success factors that maybe can be said to be general. So let's say, if we look at the learnings here, I think it's important to have a project leader that thinks this is an important project and has a bit of a go-getter mentality. I think you have to have that. And you need to make sure that you have aligned with the segment, with the, let's say, local site about that this is a priority, we should do this. You need, to a certain extent, clean master data, not to the extent that you need an APS system. I think you can kind of clean it as you go. Carol was sort of highlighting that, the dependency on master data is not quite as high in this regard, and I think that's a good thing. Then, of course, you need to make sure that the data integration is there, so you have to kind of get IT on board to make sure that that happens. If you want to go this way of letting the supplier holding a buffer, you have to involve sourcing. I mean, then you have to go cross-functionally to the supplier, I believe, to make it happen, and also make sure that it ends up on their agenda as something that is important. And you have to understand, well, you have to make sure that the users and the organization understands the change. So I think, in terms of the process and in terms of the behavior, so I think that, training is really important. When I reflect upon our priorities, we have, as you can imagine, spent much more money on training. We have spent nothing on software, apart from that we have developed, there are work hours invested into it, obviously. I think that's the right priority. I think that, you have to aim for the head, make people understand. I think that's really important. And you have to make sure that people stick to the process. You have to ensure local adherence to the process. So you have to document the standard operating procedures. You have to follow up the adherence. You have to follow up the KPIs. People will not follow just because you tell them to. I found out the hard way. Czech guys can be really stubborn, I can tell you. I don't know why, but there is something there. And you have to lock in the process in some way, I think. You have, through data integration from the DDMRP application to the ERP, so that, it's like Pokajoke. It should be easy to do it the right way. It should be difficult to do it in some other alternative way. So what are the next steps? What is it that we would want to do going forward here? Well, we are in the middle of the implementation. We are done with 15 factories. We have at least another 15 before we are done with the ones that are big enough to sort of should be a DDMRP factory. I think we can and we should expand the inventory at supplier approach to the relevant corresponding flows. I mean, let's say internally from factories that we do have in China over to Europe and North America. But externally, of course, you can go to the bigger suppliers and you can do it just as well with external suppliers. I think there is also a room for and a need for a demand planning process when it comes to how to handle the launches of new products. In the beginning of the life cycle, you have to base your ADU on something, and you have to have a forecast. That forecast can, of course, either be the back of the envelope, super optimistic business case volume of the product manager. That's kind of the default setting in my school book. Or it can be a demand planning process that actually involves sales and the other functions prior to the launch, and that you have that conversation 6 months before the launch, and then realize it's actually not here, it's here. Yeah, let's put 2 months of that into inventory and then start pulling on the basis of that and make sure that you have a capacity buffer just as much as you have an inventory buffer. So I think we need to go through that journey to sort of become really excellent. And then we also have the whole demand-driven sales and operations planning piece, where I think we can do a lot more, and I think it kind of requires a demand planning process in place to make that happen. So with that, we have reached the end of the presentation, and yeah, I'm open for any potential questions.
Great, thank you so much. I want to thank him for coming all the way from Sweden to do that. I remember the presentation in Gothenburg when I got there. Beautiful country, and we really appreciate your presentation. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.